in Zimbabwe. That is Comaliso in Zimbabwe that deals, advocates for free markets, respect for private property rights and constitutionalism. So, Rejoice, if you can hear me, how are you, sir? Rejoice, if you can hear me. Rejoice, if you can hear me, sir.
No.
Rejoice.
Hello.
Technical issues with Rejoice, but yeah. How are you, sir?
I can hear you.
State of authoritarian governments, mostly Africa, but I'm very sure that this is not only happening in Africa. We've seen the same happening in China, Turkey, and a host of other countries, Brazil, and so on. So yeah, we're going to be listening to you as you talk. You take us through what you have for us. And then at the end of your presentation, we shall be having a Q&A session where our attendees will be floating questions to you, and then we can see how we can move forward, in trying to uphold our democracies and limiting the state power. You see, most governments, have taken this opportunity to try and consolidate power. Most dictatorship, technically, that's what we are seeing in most countries. So, welcome, Rejoice.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me loud and clear.
Yes, we can get you. We can now get you.
Well, unfortunately, I can't. I'm not having the video, link, so I'm not too sure whether it's going to degrade the value of my contribution without the video.
Absolutely not.
Right. Okay, so I can start, right?
Yes. Please go ahead.
Right. My personal position and understanding is that we have a structural issue with constitutions in the world. These are constitutions that are basically structured around the excessive power of the executive, especially in Africa, and surely our experience so far, even with American governance behavior, is that at any one time, Donald Trump can be able to evoke some kind of executive presidential power, which in Africa has been used abundantly when there is an emergency. But the challenge that we have really with African governance is that we elect members of parliament based on a parliamentary democracy system. So we elect members of parliament to go and represent us in parliament. Now, when the ruling party, when a party then gets into power, they don't necessarily select their cabinet from the existing members of parliament. Most constitutions allow the executive president, who already has excessive executive power, to choose his own cabinet. So whether the selection is based on merit, or it's based on party affiliation or populist partisan based situation, generally it's beyond the control of the voter. So then what happens is that once the leader of the party, who has a parliamentary majority, wins, he is then able to select his own cabinet. That is the cabinet that he then abuses and uses to ring-fence its authority. The parliamentary majority is used as leverage to make any alterations to the constitution. So in a normal parliamentary democracy, the executive has to revert to parliament for specific decisions. Even if in a state of emergency like we have with COVID-19, the ruling party or the president who is in power must revert to parliament in order to evoke certain powers and authority. Now that is not done because, for instance, like we have in Zimbabwe, the Presidential Powers Act can be exercised through a series of statutory instruments. We also know that in different African countries, the presidents have made decrees that are related to COVID on the basis that it's an emergency, and they have had no time to go to parliament and seek permission authority. They need to go back to parliament to say these executive orders that were put in place, how constitutional are they? Because sometimes those emergencies don't fall under the classical context of an emergency that has to go to, that does not want parliamentary agreement, or it has to be done retrospectively. So even without constitutional authorities to use that executive power, African governments have a tendency towards authoritarian dictatorship. So even without an emergency, you're going to find that the Emerson Mnangagwas of the world, the John Magufulis, the Kenyattas and the Ramaphosas of the world will use their parliamentary majority to take decisions on behalf of citizens, which we have not really, given authority. So the growing tendency towards abuse of executive power is based on the defect, on the dysfunctional constitutional structures that we have in Africa. Now, I get surprised then when the bastion of global democracy, the United States, where you get Donald Trump saying, look, there are certain powers that I can use, but I don't have to use them. But if you force me to use those powers, I can use them. Obviously, even the American Constitution gives the presidency the privilege of evoking certain powers. Those are the powers that we are today talking about, saying there is an increasing tendency and the growth of abuse of those powers. Look, I'm the first person to say that when there is a national disaster like a flood or an earthquake, for certain groups of citizens to qualify for public support, there must be some kind of statutory pronouncement that it's an emergency, and these citizens need to have access to through the national budget for them to be supported. But I do not think that COVID-19 has reached a level where our individual rights, our basic fundamental rights have to be abused. These presidents are now telling us when to leave home, in what state to leave home, when to go to work, which shops to go and buy, what products to use. This to me basically is unacceptable, because none of these guys, none of these presidents came back to parliament to say, look, we are facing a situation. What are we going to do? They don't even have the budget for that. We have certain, in African countries where presidents are creating excessive multi-billion-dollar budgets to mitigate COVID-19. And nobody is saying where that money is going to be coming from. So obviously that money is going to be printed, and once it is unleashed onto the monetary system, the inflationary results are going to have catastrophic impact on economies. It's not going to be possible to compute and calculate the impact of inflation in some of these countries. So they give very genuine excuses, that we need to do that because we are facing an unprecedented pandemic called COVID-19. But the statutory instruments that create the necessary fiscal, budgets are very inflationary, and I've yet to hear of a parliament that sat down to appropriate these budgets that are being used to mitigate, COVID-19. And I know that a lot of African governments and presidents with so much executive authority have been itching to use their executive powers. I will give an example. For instance, in Zimbabwe and in South Africa, the military was dispatched onto the streets as part of the state advocacy to keep the citizens locked up in their homes. Now, my understanding of a democracy is that when citizens know what carnage and pandemic they are facing, they know what to do. They know how to protect themselves. So the most constitutions have got acts, laws that have a civil, entity in place that is supposed to run a civil, disaster. You don't need to have the military in the streets moving around in AK-47 and machine guns, beating up people to comply with the COVID, pandemic. So at this stage, really, and I would say that it is very correct to say there is a growing abuse of state power, some of it which can be traced back to the Constitution, which really means that, even in a constitutional democracy, some clauses need to be relooked at to see whether or not they don't really necessarily put citizens under the mercy of, presidents that have a tendency towards authoritarian dictatorship. So for the time being, I think I would make these comments and these observations. Musila, I've made my initial remarks, and I'm waiting for your intermediate submission.
Okay. Thank you so much for pointing out. What we should be ideally expecting from countries that claim to be operating in democracies, and of course. You pointed out the issues that we have, with the structure of most constitutions that we have, with the old issues of presidents appointing, their ministers and so on. And of course, you must, if you serve at the pleasure of the president or the prime minister, whatever it is, of course you have to do whatever they require to keep them in power. So thank you for that presentation. I like to ask our attendees at this moment to type any questions that they may have for you. But as that happens, of course, I'll be engaging you with a couple of questions that I have. Well, of course, we will send that extent to what governments are doing, in excess of it. Would you talk to attendees about the whole concept of a limited government? Because the basis of this argument that authoritarian power is increasing, is because government is supposed to to have certain limits. yeah, for the new guys, maybe someone who doesn't have the knowledge about the whole concept of a limited government. We do try to paint a picture for us on what the government should be doing at this moment, and yeah.
Well, look, I mean, the size of government. I mean, as liberals, we have always, committed ourselves to ensure that we don't put governments that are large and that are a cost to the national fiscals. It is very true that the bigger the government, the more sub-units it puts in place, and the more likely that it is going to be more cumbersome and less able to respond to emergencies. Because the first problem that we have in Turkey is that when a government is big, you have already depleted the capacity of that government to make savings to sustain a crisis like COVID-19. Because I know that a lot of citizens in the world are crying for governments for subsidies and for what they call stimulus packages, which I don't understand why the free market system allows the private sector to scream for stimulus packages. But that's not the point. The point being that by enlarging a government, you are already creating very strong grounds for a bloated system that will need to be sustained by a huge tax burden on citizens, which means that your ability to mitigate a pandemic is also limited, because as I said, that the national savings are eroded. For instance, in Zimbabwe, I would say that with our small, $4 to $6 billion GDP, about 60 to 70% of government revenue is, swallowed up in the black hole of, wages and salaries for civil servants. So already, this is why you find that our government is very keen to be looking for donations from across the borders, including the Bretton Woods institutions, because the government is already too big. But when it comes to the use of state power, I don't think it has anything really to do with the size of government. I think it's more to do with how the government interprets the constitutional clauses that give it power. We have big governments, in the world. I mean, we have the American government, the India, of course, it's not the government is not very big, but the population is what large, So it doesn't matter what. It's good for liberals to advocate for small government, which is okay, because they are more efficient, they are more accountable, and they are more adept and more flexible when it comes to dealing with emergencies. But the problem is the way the constitution is structured, that it gives unnecessary executive authority to the ruling government. That is where the crux of the matter is. So I don't want to make a synonymous relationship between size of government and use of excessive state power. These are two different elements that have to be treated on two different ideological platforms. Because one would need to do a bit of research to see whether there is any interconnectivity between a big government and excessive use of state power. But in a way, if a government is small, it's easy for the government during an emergency to revert back to parliament. But if you are going to be calling 300 members of parliament from 25 regions to deliberate over a set of emergencies, it's going to be expensive. It's not compared to having 100 constituencies and a cabinet of 10 ministers. So the relationship is there, but it is very remote. It does not have a direct impact on the way that executive presidents you'd be surprised that if another president, comes into power with exactly the same powers that were bestowed onto him or her by the Constitution, they might exercise them differently. So it eventually lends itself around the character and the nature of the person who is in power. Because I know that even in Tanzania, we had Kikwete, and there was somebody else before him, Benjamin Mkapa, but the way that Dr. Magufuli is handling the power dynamics is very different. It's a reflection of individuals rather than the size of government. So I think let's stay on the track of how our constitution to be restructured to reflect a more consultative process and system and a more compact way in which government presidents, states should exercise power through parliamentary consultation rather than presidential and executive authority acts. Mr.
Okay, thank you for that, Joyce. I want to ask you. Of course, these are COVID-19. Technically, it started from China, and of course, we've had the whole issues of doctors, of journalists, and so on being silenced by the Chinese government, from speaking out when first this virus was reported. So do you think that it's these authoritarian contacts of such governments that has contributed to the growth of this pandemic, or rather this virus to become a global issue, to become a pandemic?
Yeah, look, we did also talk about it in one or two other conferences in the past few weeks, run by Atlas. If this disease, for instance, assuming that this disease originated from a laboratory in California or in the Nevada mountains, I think because of the nature of the transparency and the openness of democracy in the USA, it could have been handled differently. The expose, I'm sure that the Washington Post, the New York Times, CNN and Fox News would have been able to track this thing, quite early. So it will show you, it will now tell us that because by nature, this communist system of governance is very protective to the establishment. And I still insist that it is not a conspiracy theory to say that COVID, the coronavirus, originated from the Hubei province in Hubei in China. It's not those are the facts. The facts are very clear. If communist governance was not as opaque and as secretive as it is, the media, the global media, including the World Health Organization, would have been able to expose the virility of this, of this disease much earlier, as early as early December. So my submission, Misoki, is that the culpability of the Chinese government is beyond dispute. The Chinese are responsible for withholding critical information, and I've always held my strong position that our African friend who runs the World Health Organization, the WHO, could have been more forceful, because they argue that they don't, by nature, they don't, interfere in the sovereignty of any country. But the culpability of the Chinese is so glaringly clear that anything that is less than global compensation for the damage that this virus has had on our economies will be will be an act of injustice. So I still hold that if China was a constitutional democracy where the free market functions, openly, and the media is allowed to exercise its investigative authority, this disease would have been exposed as early as early December, and the world would have been in a different position as it is now, Misioki.
Okay, thank you for that. I think in the last 24 or 48 hours, we've heard from Rwanda. Well, they have elections coming up, and rallies, of course, they are still, conducting rallies and so on. So I'd like to pick your mind on the whole logic, of a government, restricting its citizens from, moving around, their public life and are going to work and so on, while at the same time a government is conducting rallies and even expelling WHO doctors who have been calling the government out. So what is it with the problem? What is the problem with the African these African leaders and politics? Because it doesn't make sense that a government would be forcing its citizens to stay at home, not to go to work and so on. But then when elections come during the very same period, politicians are out there, including the sitting president, having rallies and so on.
Msila, what is really disappointing me with African governance is that this is where you see the abuse of executive authority. I mean, in the first place, look, when you have elections, already the state is under some kind of financial or fiscal pressure. So it is always advisable that we Africans in our countries, we save for these things, for elections, and because democracy, it does not come cheap, right? So generally, it is understandable that when a country is in a state of elections, electoral preparedness means a lot of movement, people going up and down campaigning, and huge crowds getting together and so forth. So the assumption is that once a president who has excessive authority unleashes that electoral season, it is very difficult to control the way the masses get together. But my humble submission really would be that it is not advisable really to organize any election during a national disaster, whether it is an earthquake or a volcano or a flood or a pandemic. But that is not the job of the government. It's the job of the electoral commission that has powers to determine the conditions that are conducive or necessary for electoral, practice in a country. But I think getting your point to talk about governments using their authority to keep citizens away from work and from exercising their social responsibilities. This is what we have been saying all along for the past 20 or 30 minutes, that citizens know what to do when there's an emergency. They don't necessarily need executive authority, but you can have a policy in place that guides health behavior during an emergency. And frankly speaking, for me in Africa, elections are not really a priority, because elections can come and go, and there may not be a change of government or even a change of system. So what is more important, what is urgent, is to have political reforms that ensure that elections are extremely free and fair, and that they create institutions that are independent, that are able to guide, the state in terms of what should be done during a state of emergency. That would be my initial submission on that, Musif.
Okay, thank you, Rejoice. Now, of course, the very first time, I remember the very first time we had the first case in Kenya. I think it was around the 14th, around March, yeah. And you could feel the tension and the fear, even among your neighbors, among your friends, and so on. And when such a thing happens, such a disaster is happening, everyone is tense, and of course, you're being told there's no vaccine, no medicine. So there's some state of desperation that citizens have across the world, and at that time, most people don't know how to handle it, and so on. And what happened was that everywhere on social media, everyone was telling the government, why are you not closing our borders? Why are you not insisting that everyone stays at home? People stop going to work and so on, so that we can be able to control the spread of this virus. So, do you think from out of this desperation, our citizens somewhat contributing to the whole growth of the authoritarian government? Are we to blame in any way, in as much as we are blaming the guys who are in government?
Right, that's a very interesting question. Look, I think any responsible citizen has an obligation not to perpetuate, a crisis, whether it is, a policeman, who is indulging in magendo, or whether it is, looting shops during a flood in a suburb, or whether it is a disease or a pandemic. Generally, a responsible citizen must not perpetuate or exacerbate or worsen circumstances in a national disaster. Right. So it is okay for us to sit in Africa, in Dar es Salaam, in Nairobi, in Harare, in Joburg, in Gaborone, and say, look, it was not our problem. We are not the ones who started COVID-19. Yeah, it is not an issue. We are not the ones. But it's a disease that is already, engulfed the world, and that is totally, annihilating salaries, wages, savings. Companies are going to shut down. Employment is going to be lost. So, as responsible African citizens, we have a responsibility of not perpetuating. So, if the state consults with the necessary, health authorities, and there is a tacit agreement that when we leave home, we should leave home. It's safer to leave home in masks. Nobody is forcing you to do that, but because you are a responsible citizen, you are symptomatic. So the best thing for you as an individual is to put on a mask. You don't have to, but it's safer for you with a mask, right? If you are on a daladala or in a matatu, and it's your responsibility to exercise social and physical distancing, and all these things, they don't require, state control, Musila. They require responsible citizenship. So, but when you are at Kibera or Karioko, and you are behaving as if things are normal, you're actually perpetuating the problem. You are tempting executive authority over you. So, in summary, I'm saying, as a responsible citizen, it's not our fault that there is COVID-19, but we might perpetuate it with our irresponsible behavior. That's my comment.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, a few weeks ago we were having a discussion with the idea and the whole issue of integrity responsibility of non-citizens came up, and I'm glad you've highlighted that in as much as the government rather the medics and so on, the stakeholders dealing with COVID-19 are giving us various measures that we can adopt. It all boils down to what individuals are doing, how responsible we are, how much we are realizing that COVID-19 is it's a threat, to the nature of our life, of how we live our lives, and so on. Of course, now the government is most governments, of course, will say they're using the excuse of the emergency, to grow the state power, authoritarianism, and so on. And of course, there are those particular effects that we are seeing at the moment. We saw with what the U.S. government did with the manufacture of the testing kits. They said that no private entity should do that, and what happens is they kept on using defective testing kits and so on. So that is one effect of this the authoritarianism that we are seeing when we are actually dealing with COVID-19. But then COVID-19 will be over in whichever amount of time, or rather, we are being maybe to learn how to live with it. But the thing is, governments will always use that excuse that there might come such and such an emergency after we are done with dealing with COVID-19, and we need to take certain measures, to anticipate some of these emergencies. So, what do you think, or what do you foresee as how these authoritarian governments, or to what level do you think that this authoritarianism is going to be perpetuated post COVID-19?
Right, post-COVID, yeah, that's an interesting question. I think, my submission, Umsila, is always that it is us citizens that create these dictators. We are very lethargic when it comes to, agitating for democratic evolution. So, the dictators use as much power as we have given them. When I say we, I mean, for instance, in Zimbabwe, the ZANU-PF government said they won a parliamentary majority and so forth, and we know that they didn't win. They used the power of the incumbency. But it's those citizens that voted for ZANU-PF, those citizens that vote for Chama Pinduzi, those citizens that vote for ANC are the ones that are responsible for putting these guys into power. So, but as a democratic and a liberal movement, as a force of influential, citizens, even if we are few, we need to, after COVID, we need to relook at our constitutions and at our, legislative instruments, and see what is it about these instruments that can be changed in order that when there is COVID 25 or 2030, we don't get into a similar situation of giving an opportunity for dictators to use the state leverage on excessive power. For the time being, there is nothing much. Even if you went to court now to argue for your rights, I'm sure that the dictators always have these courts that are compromised. The judiciary system is always contaminated and compromised. So, but we need to be documenting these cases of abuse of power, so that when we have gone through COVID-19, we are then able to compile, cases and references on how state power can be checked and put into control, giving necessary references and ensuring that we use post-COVID the constitutional powers of the Supreme Court and the Constitutional Court to give an example of how this power has to be checked. So we have an opportunity to do that, Musila, and I think we need to start compiling those cases because all the evidence is available.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, of course, I agree because we have to be able to show that this is the decision that you made. These are the effects that it had, and we also have to be able to show like a series of what the government has been doing to be able to argue our case against the authoritarian government. Now, one thing that most people will argue that has been causing a lot of confusion when it comes to dealing with fake news. Trump calls them. It's been fake news, concerning COVID-19, and we've read all the conspiracies around where the disease started, where it came from, and so on and so on. Well, this will not be related per se to the state power, but I'd like to get your view on this fake news. So, how do we deal with the whole issue of fake news? And two, whose role is it, to deal with the growing trend of having fake news concerning almost everything? And well, does the government have any stake, in control of fake news, given in mind that when we allow the government to get involved so much with the media, the journalism, and so on, what happens?
Well, look, Musila, the word control does not appear in my liberal dictionary because my submission is that when a citizenry lives in a democracy and is enlightened and informed and educated, they can use their freedom to discern fake news or genuine news. Because the social network system is like a gun, A gun can be used to protect a family. It can be used to chase down criminals. It can be used for peace and war. So the free world cannot have their cake and eat it. We have at our disposal amazing, social network instruments of all kinds, Facebook, Google, Zoom, and so forth. So those instruments are available to both professional journalists and social network, informal journalists. They are available to hackers. They are available to computer scientists, and so we should allow the free world to roll along and hope that we use our independence and freedom to determine what is fake, what is not fake, what is conspiracy, what is an academic thesis. Because once we allow government, states, once we allow their institutions, once we allow Larry Page, once we allow the Facebook guys to Weibo, Jack Ma, once we allow these guys to start controlling what they think is fake news and not fake news, we are going to run into trouble. because the next time they want to put out propaganda which supports their view, we are not going to be able to control them. Let us, as the consumers of news, be the judge of what is fake and what is not fake by using our intelligence and our enlightenment. Musila.
Okay, thank you so much. Of course, you've touched something on the whole online mechanisms that people are using, and one thing that has not been possible during coronavirus is activists who take to the streets and so on. Of course, we saw a bit of that in the US, but I don't think mostly in Africa we've been able to see that because, well, technically everyone has been in their houses. So
Right.
what is arising is a question of can we take these activism online? So that means if we are home or not, we can be able to raise any concerns we have at the government. And of course, well, I've interacted with you. I've interacted with you on social media and so on. And quite a bit of activism, and when you look at the rural libertarian community in Africa and so on, most of us, apart from the conferences and so on that we hold, what we see is a lot of activism happening
Right.
online. So what do you think? Do you think there's much potential of taking this activism online, and how effective is it going to be compared to me and my friends and other guys walking up to the to State House and demanding ABCD?
Right. Interesting, because you know that internet connectivity is a growing force in the world, and you know if there is one thing that has taught us, Musila, is that when we were always talking in conferences about the importance of connectivity, the importance of citizens being adept in using instruments of social media control and having the ability to download platforms and software. You know, we were talking as if we were asking for too much. But we have now seen, because of COVID-19, that it is necessary that one day, not too far away, all lobby and activism and parliamentary exchanges and education and diagnosis, everything, 80% of it is going to be online, the Internet of Things, so that we cannot run away from. I think the days of or Rejoice carrying a banner saying I'm going to State House to complain about dictatorship, I think those days are over. You know, there is an incredible array, Musila, of instruments that one can use. You know, you can share with a click of a button, 5,000, users and, people online, and they can perpetuate that. I don't think there is a need for us to be sentimental about, physical demonstration. We expose ourselves. In African dictators, they will be shooting us in the streets. I think what I can say on my Facebook page, on my Twitter page, in my Google Mail, I can say to more than I can, the number of people that I can say when I'm walking down the street carrying a banner, say, bring back our girls, or down with dictatorship. So I agree with you. Internet activism is the end thing, and we are stuck with it. We better learn how to manipulate the instruments.
Okay, thank you so much. Yeah, there's that has been Joyce talking to us about the authoritarian government and the growing state power that we've seen as a result of COVID-19. What the governments are trying to do, and of course, as much as most of these guys in government, well, some of them are idealists, that's for sure. But in as much as they're trying to implement some measures that are meant to control the spread coronavirus, it hasn't been without